After divorcing me, my husband threw my belongings out of the house and called my parents. Come pick up your useless daughter right now. I've divorced her. 15 minutes later, my father arrived in his luxury car, accompanied by 3 bodyguards. "This is my house. You're the one leaving, now, or I'll break your legs," my father shouted. My shameless ex-husband immediately fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness. From that moment on, I made sure he would regret everything and suffer deeply. Before the story begins, please comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so Midnight Tales Studio can continue growing and bring you even more thrilling stories. The sound of the front door slamming violently made the entire house tremble. Emily Carter, who had been sitting on the living room sofa, jumped in shock. Her heart pounded as she saw her husband. Jason Carter stormed inside, his face flushed red with rage. There was no greeting, no warm smile like he used to have after work, only a burning glare, as if he wanted to devour Emily alive. Jason walked straight toward her and stopped right in front of her. Without warning, his arm swung violently, not to strike her, but to throw a thick brown envelope straight at her face. The sharp edge grazed Emily's cheek, leaving a stinging cut. But the pain in her heart was far worse when the envelope fell into her lap. With trembling hands, Emily stared at it, then looked up at her husband, who now stood with his hands on his hips, breathing heavily. Before she could even ask what it was, Jason shouted, his voice echoing through the house. "I'm sick of seeing your face in this house. That's a divorce paper. Sign it right now and get out of my sight. I divorce you, Emily. From this moment on, you're no longer my wife." The words pierced Emily's chest like thousands of needles. She swallowed hard, trying to hold on to what little sanity she had left as her world collapsed without warning. Just that morning, Jason had left for work like usual. Though he'd grown cold over the past few months, Emily never imagined things would end like this. She stood up, trying to reach for his hand, seeking an explanation. But Jason shoved her away roughly, causing her to stumble back onto the sofa. He looked at her with utter contempt, as if she were nothing but dirt stuck to his shoe. He paced the room, pointing at her as he spoke, mocking her for knowing nothing about business or high-class social circles. He bragged about his company's massive profits, claiming he deserved a partner worthy of his status, not a boring housewife like her. Emily listened silently as tears fell, not because she was weak, but because she never expected the man she helped build his empire from nothing to turn into a monster. She remembered clearly how Jason once came to her with nothing but dreams, begging for her parents' blessing, promising to cherish her forever. Now that success was in his hands, he had forgotten everything. Forgot who gave him the initial capital, forgot who introduced him to key business connections, forgot who stood by him when he nearly went bankrupt. Impatient with her silence, Jason stormed into the master bedroom. The sound of drawers being yanked open and furniture being slammed echoed through the house. Emily followed weakly to the doorway. She watched as Jason ripped her clothes from the closet, not placing them into a suitcase, but stuffing them carelessly into large black trash bags. Her dresses, daily clothes, cosmetics, books, all swept off the vanity with one harsh swing of his arm. Emily tried to stop him, grabbing his arm and begging him to talk calmly. Jason shoved her into the wall. He yelled that he refused to let her cheap belongings pollute his expensive wardrobe, claiming it would soon be filled with luxury items belonging to a woman far more classy than her. The name Hannah slipped from his mouth. Emily's heart shattered. So her suspicions were true. There was another woman. Once everything was packed into trash bags, Jason dragged them outside and threw them on the front lawn. The bags hit the pavement with dull thuds. Neighbors might have seen everything, but Jason didn't care. Getting rid of Emily was all that mattered now. He turned back to her with a cruel smile, pulled out his phone, and deliberately put it on speaker. After a few rings, a deep male voice answered. It was Richard Wilson, Emily's father. Without any respect, Jason spat his words. "Come pick up this useless trash right now. I've divorced your daughter. She's incompetent, a burden, and only knows how to spend my money. I don't want to see her face in my house ever again. If you don't come soon, I'll have sanitation workers haul her away with the garbage." Emily covered her mouth, sobbing as she heard her father humiliated. There was a brief silence on the line. Then Jason hung up. He laughed, feeling victorious. He gave them 15 minutes. If her parents didn't arrive by then, he would drag Emily out to the roadside and abandon her there. Emily looked at Jason, her sorrow slowly turning into pity because Jason had no idea who he had just insulted. Emily had lived modestly by choice, hiding her family's true status to protect his pride as a husband. But today, Jason himself had destroyed that shield. She wiped her tears and walked calmly to her trash bags, waiting. 15 minutes later, the deep, powerful sound of a high-end engine approached. A black luxury sedan stopped in front of the open gate, followed by two massive black SUVs blocking the road. Jason frowned. He didn't recognize these vehicles. The sedan rolled into the driveway. The rear door opened. A middle-aged man stepped out, his presence commanding. It was Richard Wilson, but not the man Jason thought he knew. Gone was the simple, humble father. Today, Richard wore a tailored suit, radiating authority and power. 6 security guards stepped out behind him. Jason tried to stay arrogant. "This is my house," he scoffed. "Take your daughter and leave." Richard ignored him. He first checked Emily's injured cheek, then gestured for security to escort her into the sedan. Only then did Richard turn to Jason. His gaze was icy, sharp enough to pierce straight to the bone. Richard Wilson stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Jason. Instinctively, Jason took a step back, overwhelmed by the sheer authority radiating from his former father-in-law. Still trying to fight his fear, Jason shouted that Richard had no right to step onto his property without permission. He threatened to call the police if Richard and his people didn't leave immediately. Pointing angrily toward the gate, Jason tried to drive his own father-in-law away, as if he were nothing more than a beggar. Richard let out a short, dry laugh, humorless and cold. From inside his suit jacket, he pulled out a document folder and tossed it straight into Jason's chest, exactly the same way Jason had thrown the divorce papers into Emily's face earlier. Jason caught the folder in confusion. His hands trembled as he opened it. His eyes widened in horror as he read the documents inside. It was the original deed to the luxury house he had been living in, and printed clearly on the ownership line was a single name: Emily Carter, daughter of Richard Wilson. "This is my house, registered in my daughter's name," Richard roared. "You're the one leaving, now, or I'll break your legs." His voice thundered, far more terrifying than Jason's earlier screams. Jason's world collapsed in an instant. His knees went weak. Only then did he realize he had never once held the property deed. He had always assumed Emily kept it in a safe. But in truth, Richard had kept it all along as a wedding gift registered solely under Emily's name. Jason's mind raced. If the house wasn't his, then what about the company?
Cold sweat poured down his temples. He suddenly remembered the initial capital for his business had come from a mysterious investor introduced and arranged by Emily. Reality struck him like a brutal slap. All his arrogance vanished in seconds. His once fierce face turned deathly pale. He had awakened a sleeping tiger. Without realizing it, Jason collapsed to the ground. He fell at Richard's feet, clutching his legs with trembling hands. Crocodile tears streamed down his face as he begged for forgiveness. He claimed it was all a moment of anger, that he had misspoken, that he never meant what he said. He pleaded not to be thrown out, promising to fix his relationship with Emily. Richard looked down at him in disgust. He nudged Jason's shoulder with his shoe, forcing him to let go. "Your chance ended the moment you called my daughter trash," Richard said coldly. "That was the moment you dug your own grave." He didn't need apologies from a man who didn't know how to respect women. Richard gestured to Brian and the security team. Brian stepped forward, grabbing Jason by the collar from behind and yanking him up like a stray kitten. Jason struggled wildly, screaming Emily's name, hoping she would step out of the car and defend him like she always used to. But the windows of the black sedan remained dark and sealed. Emily would not come out. Her heart was already closed to him. Brian and other guards dragged Jason out of the property. Jason clung desperately to a gate pillar, but the trained guards were far stronger. They pried his hands loose and threw him onto the asphalt road outside the gate. Jason crashed to the ground, his elbows and knees scraping painfully against the rough pavement. He wore only the clothes on his back. His wallet and phone were still left behind on the terrace table. Brian blocked him from returning. Richard stood at the gate, looking down at Jason's pitiful form. From that day on, Jason was forbidden to approach Emily or any Wilson family property within 100 meters. If he violated it, Richard promised consequences far worse. The iron gate closed loudly right in front of Jason's face. The sound of the lock clicking shut felt like a death sentence to his future. Jason struggled to his feet, his body aching all over. He staggered along the roadside as neighbors watched with mocking stares and whispered among themselves. His pride was utterly destroyed. Suddenly, a red sedan stopped nearby. It was Hannah's car. Jason felt a surge of relief. At least he still had her. He rushed toward the vehicle and knocked eagerly at the window. The window lowered only slightly. Hannah looked at him from behind dark sunglasses, her expression strange and distant. She took in his filthy clothes, his bruises, and the reality that he had just been thrown out of the house she thought belonged to him. Jason begged her to open the door, asking her to leave with him. Instead, Hannah questioned him suspiciously. Why was he kicked out? Where was his luxury car? Jason stammered, struggling to explain. The moment Hannah sensed something was wrong, that Jason might have lost everything, she rolled the window back up. Without a single word, the red sedan sped away. Jason stood frozen on the roadside, alone, covered in dust and regret that had only just begun. Inside the luxury sedan carrying Emily, the atmosphere was quiet but soothing. Emily sat in the back seat, resting her head on her mother's Margaret Wilson's shoulder. Margaret gently stroked her daughter's arm. Emily's sobs had faded, replaced by an empty stare slowly filling with resolve. Richard sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror to check on his only daughter. He knew her heart was broken, but he also knew beneath her softness flowed the same resilient blood as his own. Emily took a deep breath, wiped the last of her tears, and straightened her posture. Crying would not change the fact that her marriage was over, but she had the power to make sure the destruction did not fall on her, but on the man who betrayed her. Upon arriving at her parents' estate, far more magnificent than the house Jason once occupied, Emily asked her parents' assistant for a new phone. Her old one had been left behind inside the bag Jason had thrown out. Her first move was not to lock herself in her room and cry. Instead, she contacted the family bank and asset management division. With a calm but firm voice, Emily ordered every financial facility she had ever granted Jason to be frozen immediately. Unlimited credit cards, joint account access, company-registered vehicles, all of it blocked. She wanted Jason to finally feel what it was like to live without the financial lifeline he had taken for granted. Margaret looked at her daughter with pride. The sharp, intelligent Emily she knew had returned. Meanwhile, Jason wandered the sidewalk aimlessly. The sun began to set. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. He checked his pockets, finding only a thin wallet with a few bills and several platinum credit cards that once defined his pride. He tried to suppress his panic. This was just a bluff, he told himself. Emily would come crawling back tomorrow. With the last shred of confidence he had, Jason walked into a five-star hotel nearby. He planned to stay the night, enjoy room service, and think things through after a hot shower. His dirty, disheveled appearance made the receptionist eye him skeptically. Jason slammed his primary credit card onto the marble counter arrogantly. The receptionist processed it. Seconds later, her brow furrowed. She tried again, then shook her head. Politely, she informed him that the card had been declined. Jason snorted, assuming the hotel's machine was broken. He handed over a second card, then a third. Same result. Every card, from major banks to exclusive black cards, was rejected. Jason's face flushed, not from anger, but from humiliation. Guests behind him whispered, staring at him as if he were a con artist caught red-handed. The receptionist returned the cards and asked him to pay in cash or leave. Jason didn't have enough cash for the deposit. With shaking hands, he gathered his cards and walked out under the staff's disdainful stares. Night grew colder. Jason tried calling Hannah, only to find his number blocked. He asked strangers to borrow their phones. No one trusted him. Finally, he gave up. He ended up in a quiet city park. No soft bed, no air conditioning, no warm blanket. He sat on a peeling wooden bench as mosquitoes buzzed around him. His stomach growled loudly, but his cash was limited. He had no idea how long this would last. In the cold darkness, Jason reflected. In just a few hours, his life had turned upside down. He felt wronged. He blamed Richard. He blamed Emily. Hatred and resentment clouded his reason. Tomorrow, he decided, he would go to his office. That company was his kingdom. Surely Richard couldn't touch him there. Believing this, Jason fell asleep sitting upright, hugging his knees, shivering like the homeless men he once despised. The harsh morning sun jolted him awake. His body ached. His neck was stiff. He felt sticky and filthy. Morning joggers stared at him in disgust. Some even covered their noses. Jason hurriedly stood up, straightening his wrinkled shirt, trying to reclaim his dignity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Dead.
Staggering forward, Jason searched for a small roadside shop to buy bottled water and charge his phone for a few minutes. The moment the phone powered on, notifications flooded the screen. One email stood out, marked with a red exclamation point. Jason opened it, his heart pounding. His eyes widened as he read the subject line. Notice of immediate termination and dishonorable removal from the position of Chief Executive Officer. Jason's blood boiled. He slammed the plastic cup of water onto the ground, splashing it everywhere, prompting the shop owner to shout angrily at him. Jason didn't care. This was outrageous. How could he be fired from a company he believed he had built? In his mind, he had played a crucial role in its success. He was convinced this was Richard Wilson's doing, manipulating the board of directors behind the scenes. With the last of the cash in his wallet, Jason flagged down a taxi. He had to go to the office now. He would confront HR, confront the board, and prove that without him, the company would collapse. If they truly intended to discard him, he would demand millions of dollars in severance. The taxi stopped in front of a grand office tower in the city's business district. Jason stepped out with long, angry strides, ignoring his disheveled appearance. His shirt was wrinkled, there were dirt stains on his pants from the park bench. His face was oily, unshaven. As he approached the revolving doors of the lobby, 2 large security guards blocked his path. They were the same guards who used to greet him respectfully every morning. This time, their muscular arms pressed firmly against his chest. They told him bluntly that he was not allowed inside the building. Jason exploded in anger in front of a lobby crowded with employees arriving for work. He shouted at the guards, demanding to know if they had gone blind. Did they not recognize their own CEO? The commotion drew attention. Employees who once trembled before Jason now gathered in clusters, whispering while staring at him. Some looked pitying, most looked amused or disgusted. Jason continued struggling, screaming that he was the boss and would fire anyone who dared stop him. He failed to realize that he was no longer anything more than a disruptive stranger. Suddenly, the lobby fell silent. The automatic glass doors slid open. From the VIP drop-off area entered a group of sharply dressed individuals walking in synchronized strides. At the very front was a woman walking gracefully, yet radiating overwhelming authority. It was Emily Carter, but not the Emily Jason knew, the one who wore simple clothes at home. This Emily wore a perfectly tailored business blazer, elegant slacks, and a neatly styled shawl that framed her face with modern sophistication. Her high heels struck the marble floor with decisive clicks, each step declaring her dominance. Behind Emily walked the company's board members and senior attorneys, people Jason always feared and respected. They all followed a step behind her, clearly indicating who now held the highest position. Jason stood frozen, staring in disbelief. His tongue went numb. His wife, his ex-wife, walked past him as if he didn't exist. Emily's face was cold, her gaze fixed straight ahead, not even glancing toward the source of the chaos. Feeling ignored, Jason shouted her name hoarsely, trying to break through the security barrier. Emily stopped. She didn't fully turn, only glanced slightly to the side. That single motion was enough to make the entire lobby hold its breath. Jason seized the moment. He demanded an explanation for his dismissal. He claimed he had earned the company through 5 years of hard work. He accused Emily and her family of illegally seizing his position. He spoke in gasps, hoping Emily would soften or at least feel embarrassed in front of the employees. Emily slowly turned to face him. She looked him up and down without emotion, as if examining an uninteresting object. Calmly, her voice clear and echoing through the silent lobby, Emily spoke. Jason had forgotten one fundamental fact. All capital, shares, and company assets belonged to the Wilson family. Jason had merely been a trusted executive, and that trust had been abused for personal gain.
She added that the audit team was currently uncovering his financial embezzlement and a formal police report was already being processed. Jason froze. His feet felt nailed to the floor. The look in Emily's eyes was unfamiliar. There was no love, no warmth, only the resolute of a corporate leader cutting away a parasite. Jason tried to speak, to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. He knew he had lost. In front of dozens of employees, he stood stripped of title, wealth, and dignity. Emily didn't wait for a response. She turned forward again, then glanced at the building's head of security beside her. In a flat, icy tone, she delivered the final blow. "Security, why is there a smelly, noisy stranger in my office lobby? Remove him. Take him to the trash, where he belongs. Do not allow him to disrupt my employees' work." With that, Emily turned and walked toward the executive elevator. The elevator doors closed, lifting her toward the peak of power, leaving Jason behind. The security guards acted immediately. They dragged Jason out of the building, through the revolving doors, down the lobby steps, and threw him onto the hot sidewalk outside. His work bag followed, landing in a puddle left over from last night's rain. Jason sat dazed on the curb, staring up at the towering building he once bragged about, realizing the doors to his luxurious life had closed forever. The sun climbed higher, scorching the asphalt. Jason trudged away, discarded like trash. The hunger in his stomach was replaced by a burning ache in his chest and a growing sense of vengeance. He checked his pocket. His wallet was still there, though nearly empty. Only one hope remained: Hannah, the woman he adored, the woman he believed understood him better than anyone, the woman he divorced Emily for. Jason was certain Hannah wouldn't let him suffer. Hadn't they loved each other? He quickened his pace, flagging down a taxi with his last cash, heading to Hannah's luxury apartment. That apartment was proof of his love, leased annually at an outrageous price, using company funds disguised in financial reports. At the apartment lobby, Jason tried to act normal, despite his appearance. The receptionist eyed him suspiciously, but since Jason was a familiar face, they allowed him through to the elevator. Jason sighed of relief. At least this hadn't been cut off, yet. Inside the elevator to the 20th floor, Jason rehearsed his words. He would describe the cruelty of Emily's family and ask Hannah to shelter him temporarily. With her beauty and connections, they could rebuild. Maybe Hannah still had the diamond jewelry he'd given her. They could sell it as startup capital. The elevator doors opened. Jason hurried to Unit 205. His heart pounded with hope. He rang the doorbell repeatedly. No answer. He tried the digital door code he knew by heart. Beep. Access denied. Panic surged. He tried again. Same result. The code had been changed. Cold sweat poured down his face. He rang the bell again, pounding the door and calling Hannah's name. After a few minutes, the door opened slightly. Hannah's face appeared. No sweet smile, only cold irritation. She didn't open the door fully. The safety chain remained locked, as if Jason were dangerous. Hannah looked dressed for travel. Behind her, Jason spotted several large suitcases lined up in the living room. "Baby, why'd you change the code? Why the chain? Open, I need rest. I've had the worst day," Jason pleaded, reaching for her hand through the gap. Hannah slapped his hand away. She looked him up and down with undisguised disgust. Then she laughed softly, a laugh that
The gentle woman he had spoiled all this time turned out to be nothing more than a parasite. Jason Carter's emotions exploded. He grabbed Hannah by the shoulders and shook her violently, shouting curses and calling her an ungrateful woman. He demanded she return his money and everything he had given her. The commotion caused a neighbor from the next apartment unit to open their door and threaten to call building security. Calmly, Hannah pried Jason's hands away and stepped back. She opened her handbag, pulled out a thick envelope, and threw it straight at Jason's chest. They were photocopied documents. Jason picked them up with trembling hands. As soon as he saw what they were, his face drained of color. Bank transfer records, evidence of inflated project budgets, proof of corporate funds flowing into his personal accounts, transactions Jason had always believed were neatly hidden and untouchable. Unbeknownst to him, Hannah had been quietly collecting everything as insurance for herself. "That's my goodbye gift, proof of your corruption while running your former in-laws' company. I was planning to hand these to the police if you ever crossed me, but judging by how smart your ex-wife is, she's probably already found the same evidence. So consider it this a souvenir. Now leave before I scream you're trespassing." Jason stood frozen, his legs weak. He finally understood he was truly alone now. He had discarded the sincere woman, Emily Carter, and the woman he chased turned out to be a venomous snake. Hannah turned away, pulled her suitcase toward the elevator, and left Jason slumped on the apartment corridor floor. As the elevator doors closed and carried Hannah away, Jason felt the world plunge into darkness. He hadn't just lost his wealth and position, he had been slapped by the brutal truth that he had been nothing more than a clown, used and discarded. Moving like a walking corpse, Jason left the apartment building. He had nowhere to go. His last cash had been spent on the taxi ride. He wandered aimlessly along the scorching city sidewalks. His stomach growled, his throat burned with thirst, and his head throbbed as the threat of prison loomed over him. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Carter Family Corporation, the atmosphere was busy but controlled. Inside the glass-walled executive boardroom, Emily Carter sat at the head of the long table. Across from her, an independent audit team and corporate attorneys presented their findings. The projector screen displayed rows of figures and graphs revealing the devastating financial damage caused by Jason's leadership. Emily listened intently. Her face was calm, but her eyes radiated unwavering resolve. There were no tears left for her former husband, only a determination to uphold justice and cleanse her father's legacy from corruption. The lead auditor explained that Jason had systematically embezzled funds over the past 3 years. The methods ranged from falsifying vendor invoices and inflating procurement budgets for non-existent projects to abusing corporate credit cards for excessive personal expenses. Luxury apartment rent payments, designer handbags, jewelry worth millions of dollars, all completely unrelated to business operations. Emily nodded slowly. She had suspected, but seeing black and white proof still hurt. She instructed the legal team to proceed without mercy. She wanted Jason held accountable for every dollar he stole. Elsewhere in the city, Jason sat hunched over at a small roadside diner. He had just finished a plate of plain rice and cheap side dishes, paid with the loose change he found in his suit pocket. He looked nothing like a former CEO. His shirt was dirty and reeked of sweat, his hair unkempt, his face dull and exhausted. He stared blankly at the busy street as other patrons glanced at him with uneasy looks. Jason no longer cared. His hunger had faded, but his fear grew stronger. Hannah's deceitful face and the looming audit haunted his thoughts. Suddenly, the sound of police sirens approached, slicing through traffic noise. Jason jolted. His heart pounded wildly. He tried to calm himself, telling himself the police were heading somewhere else. He was wrong. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt directly in front of the diner. Blue lights flashed, blinding him.
Uniformed officers stepped out swiftly, followed by plainclothes detectives Jason instantly recognized. Panic surged through him. He tried to stand and flee through the back of the diner, but his foot caught on a table leg and he crashed to the floor. Before he could rise, strong hands twisted his arms behind him and slammed his face on the greasy wooden table. Metal clanged sharply as handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. The diner erupted in chaos. Customers pulled out their phones, recording everything. Jason tried to hide his face, burning with shame. Yes, Jason Carter, the once respected executive director, was being arrested like a petty thief in public. An officer read his rights and the arrest warrant for charges of corporate embezzlement, fraud, and document forgery. Jason couldn't speak, his throat locked shut. He was dragged into the police car under a barrage of smartphone cameras. Within minutes, videos of his arrest flooded social media under headlines like "Arrogant former CEO arrested at a roadside diner." At the police station, Jason was thrown into a cold, dim interrogation room. Hours passed as uncertainty crushed his sanity. When investigators finally presented the evidence, bank transfers, CCTV footage, financial staff testimonies, Jason knew there was no escape. They told him he faced more than a decade in prison, given the massive losses involved. Desperate, Jason requested one phone call. With cuffed, trembling hands, he dialed the number he knew by heart. Emily Carter. He clung to the hope, however faint, that Emily might still have some compassion left. Maybe she would withdraw the charges out of pity. Maybe she would remember their past. The line rang endlessly. "Good afternoon," a firm, professional female voice answered. It wasn't Emily, it was her personal assistant. With a hoarse, desperate voice, Jason begged to speak to Emily. He cried hysterically, saying he had been arrested and needed her help immediately. There was a brief silence. Then the assistant replied politely, but lethally. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. Miss Emily Carter cannot be disturbed. She is currently leading a critical meeting regarding the acquisition of a competitor company, one that used to be your rival. Miss Carter asked me to inform you that all matters concerning you have now been fully delegated to the company's legal team. We wish you a smooth legal process." The call disconnected. Jason stared blankly at the receiver as it slipped from his hand and dangled uselessly. His last hope was gone. Emily Carter was no longer the obedient wife he once manipulated. She had become an untouchable force, busy expanding her business empire, while Jason rotted in a narrow, foul-smelling holding cell. Jason collapsed into sobs, his wails echoing through the police corridors. A cry of regret, too late and utterly meaningless.
Calmly, Emily Carter answered that the key was honesty, hard work, and eliminating toxic elements that hinder growth. The words struck Jason Carter like a brutal slap. He knew exactly who the toxic element was. Emily didn't need to mention a name, yet it felt as though the entire world understood that Jason was the dark past she had successfully discarded. Standing beside Emily was a young, handsome man who carried himself with clear respect toward her. He was her new business partner, rumored to be growing close to her. Watching their chemistry on the giant screen pierced Jason's chest with a sharp stab of jealousy. But he knew he had no rights left. He was nothing more than dust beneath Emily's feet as she soared higher toward the sky. Jason turned away, unable to bear the blinding success of his former wife any longer. He continued walking, his heart crumbling further with every step. His thoughts drifted to his parents back in their old neighborhood. Maybe, just maybe, they would still accept him. With what little strength he had left, Jason walked for miles toward the bus terminal, hoping to secretly hitch a ride on a cheap bus or freight truck back to his parents' place on the outskirts of the city. But when he arrived, reality struck again, harder than before. He didn't need to go home to know he had already been rejected. At a small coffee stall near the terminal, a television was broadcasting crime news. Jason's face appeared clearly on the screen, labeled as a suspect in a major embezzlement case. People inside the stall mocked the man on TV, cursing corrupt executives and greedy thieves. Suddenly, someone slapped Jason's shoulder roughly. Jason turned and froze. It was his uncle, standing there with a face flushed red with anger. Jason felt a flicker of relief, thinking help had arrived. Instead, his uncle spat on the ground right in front of Jason's shoes. The man shouted furiously, accusing Jason of disgracing the entire family. His parents, he said, had fallen ill and were too ashamed to leave their house after neighbors kept gossiping about their son's crimes. His uncle forbade Jason from ever setting foot in his parents' home again if all he brought was disgrace. Jason was declared dead to the family. He was driven away like a diseased stray dog. That rejection was the final crushing blow to Jason's already shattered mind. He was truly alone in the world. The sincere wife he had thrown away, the mistress he had flaunted had robbed him blind, and now his own blood had sealed their doors shut. Jason wandered away from the terminal crowd toward a dark, deserted city park. He sat on a cold bench, staring at the gray, starless night sky. He reflected on how his life had plunged from a respected executive to a despised vagrant. That night, Jason slept curled up on the park bench using old newspapers as bedding, newspapers that featured headlines about his downfall. Mosquito bites and gnawing regret kept him company as his soul was slowly eaten away. He realized he had reached the absolute lowest point of his life, a black hole he had dug himself with greed and arrogance. After several days living on the streets, Jason's physical condition deteriorated drastically. His once solid body had become thin and frail. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken with dark circles beneath them. His clothes were filthy, shapeless, and reeked of sweat and dust after days without washing. Severe coughing and fever struck him, making his body shake violently, even under the blazing sun. Every breath felt heavy, as though his lungs were burdened with the weight of his past sins. Yet, amid the sickness, one thought haunted him relentlessly. The old house. The house where he and Emily once lived, the place where he had cruelly thrown her out. Driven by an unknown impulse, Jason forced his trembling legs to carry him toward the elite residential area where the house stood. The distance was far from the park where he usually slept, but he walked like a man on a spiritual pilgrimage of atonement. Along the way, memories replayed like a damaged old film. He remembered the early days of their marriage, when he had nothing and Emily always greeted him with a warm smile when he came home. He remembered the scent of her cooking, simple home meals prepared with love. He remembered her gentle hands massaging his shoulders when he was exhausted, her soft voice calming him when work pressures overwhelmed him. The closer he got, the more vivid the memories became. His fever worsened, and hallucinations began to take hold. On the sidewalk, he thought he saw Emily walking beside him, holding his hand, laughing happily. Jason reached out, but grasped only empty air. He smiled bitterly, realizing how foolish he had been. He had held a flawless diamond in his hands, only to discard it for a sharp pebble that cut him deeply. He had called Emily trash, when in truth he was the trash. Emily had treated him like a king, preparing everything for him from head to toe, and he had repaid her with betrayal and humiliation. The sky slowly darkened. Thick black clouds rolled in, swallowing the sun, as if nature itself mourned Jason's collapse. Strong winds swept dust and dry leaves across the streets. Finally, Jason reached the gated elite neighborhood. The security guard eyed him suspiciously, ready to drive him away, assuming he was a deranged beggar.
but Jason begged hoarsely, asking only to see his house from outside the gate. Recognizing Jason's face faintly despite the drastic change, the guard allowed him in with a stern warning, not to cause trouble. Jason dragged himself to the house, the silent witness to his crimes. As he reached the gate, rain began to fall. Light droplets quickly turned into a heavy downpour. Jason didn't seek shelter. He stood motionless, letting the cold rain soak his feverish body. He stared at the well-kept yard. Where he once hurled Emily's belongings, now a beautiful flower garden bloomed. The grass was neatly trimmed, no trace of past anger or violence remained. The house looked peaceful, warm, and elegant. In sharp contrast, Jason stood outside the gate like an unwanted ghost from the past. He clutched the cold iron bars as his legs gave way. He collapsed to his knees on the wet pavement, rain mixing with his tears as he sobbed uncontrollably. He screamed Emily's name, apologizing again and again to someone who wasn't there. He beat his chest in regret, wishing desperately to turn time back. But he knew it was impossible. What was done, irreversibly ruined. In the midst of his breakdown, bright headlights illuminated Jason from behind. A dark luxury car slowly approached the gate. Jason turned, squinting through the rain. His heart pounded. He recognized the car. It was Emily's. A foolish hope sparked inside him. Maybe she would see him. Maybe she would pity him. Maybe she would step out with an umbrella and forgive him, just like she always used to. The car stopped as the automatic gate opened. Jason struggled to stand, weakly waving toward the rear passenger window. He saw Emily's silhouette inside. The window rolled down, just a few inches. Jason held his breath, eyes shining with hope. But the window only lowered briefly, as if to identify the filthy figure by the gate. When Emily saw Jason's face, there was no shock, no sadness. Her expression was flat, cold, distant. The window rolled back up. The car didn't stop. Instead, it accelerated into the driveway. The tires splashed through muddy puddles, sending dirty water spraying directly on Jason's face and body. He coughed violently, wiping mud from his face with trembling hands. The gate slowly closed behind the car. Emily didn't step out. Emily didn't care. Emily didn't even acknowledge his existence. To her, Jason was nothing more than roadside debris, like the trash he once ordered to be hauled away. Jason was left alone outside the gate, under the pouring rain, his body covered in mud and his heart shattered beyond repair. Cold seeped into his bones, his vision blurred as hypothermia and hunger overtook him. Jason collapsed unconscious on the hard pavement in front of the house he once claimed as his own, now an impenetrable fortress separating Emily's heaven from Jason's hell. Jason awoke with a pounding headache and a body that felt completely broken. He found himself lying on a long bench inside the residential security post. Apparently, a guard who felt a brief moment of pity had dragged him to shelter so he wouldn't freeze to death. But pity had limits. The moment Jason opened his eyes, the guard ordered him to leave. Residents were disturbed by the presence of a homeless man in their elite neighborhood. Jason was driven back onto the streets, his clothes dry but stiff and reeking of mud and mildew after days without washing.
Emily Carter's rejection the night before, her cold gaze from behind the tinted car window, had transformed Jason Carter's regret into blind, uncontrollable rage. In Jason's increasingly unstable mind, Emily was the cause of all his suffering. He convinced himself that she was deliberately flaunting her wealth just to humiliate him. As he wandered the streets, a massive roadside billboard caught his attention. It announced a grand charity event to be held that very afternoon at a five-star hotel, organized by the Carter Wilson Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Emily's family. The title read, "Sharing Compassion, Building Hope for the Underprivileged." Jason burst into hysterical laughter as he read it, laughter so disturbing that anyone who heard it would feel a chill down their spine. The irony felt unbearable to him. His ex-wife was busy polishing her image as a benevolent philanthropist, while her former husband was left starving on the streets. That was when a deranged idea took root. He would go to the event. He would expose Emily in front of all the honored guests, business partners, and the media. He would scream that she was a heartless, ungrateful wife who had abandoned her husband. Jason was convinced that if he did this, Emily's reputation would collapse, and perhaps her powerful family would pay him hush money to silence the scandal. Summoning the last of his strength, Jason began walking toward the hotel. The distance was long, and the scorching sun burned his already weathered skin. When he arrived, security around the hotel was extremely tight. Someone dressed like Jason had no chance of entering through the main lobby. But Jason knew the building well. He used to hold executive meetings there. He slipped through the service entrance behind the kitchen, hid behind stacked beverage crates whenever staff passed by, and eventually made his way into a staff corridor that led directly to the main ballroom. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the explosive adrenaline of revenge. From inside the hall, he could hear thunderous applause. The event was already underway. Inside the magnificent ballroom, the atmosphere was elegant and solemn. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering warm light across the room filled with influential guests. Emily Carter stood gracefully behind the podium, radiant in modest yet stunning attire, a soft shawl draped elegantly over her shoulders. She was delivering a speech about sincerity and compassion in giving. Her voice was gentle yet authoritative, captivating hundreds of attendees. In the front row, Richard Wilson and Margaret Wilson smiled proudly as they watched their daughter. No one expected the serenity to shatter so abruptly. Suddenly, the side door of the ballroom was slammed open. All eyes turned toward the noise. Jason stood there, his appearance violently contrasting the luxury of the room. His hair disheveled, his face filthy, his clothes tattered, and even guests seated nearby could smell him. Security guards who had failed to notice him earlier rushed forward, but Jason bolted toward the stage. He snatched the microphone from the stunned host, triggering a painful burst of feedback that screeched through the speakers. "Don't be fooled by this woman," Jason roared hoarsely. "She's a liar, a hypocrite." Emily took a step back, shocked to realize that the deranged man was her ex-husband. Yet she didn't scream. She remained composed, though her face tensed. The audience began whispering. Some guests stood up in fear, assuming a madman had broken in. As security moved to restrain him, Jason threatened to harm himself with a shard of broken glass he had grabbed from a nearby table. Chaos erupted. Jason seized the moment to spew the venom in his heart. Pointing a trembling finger at Emily, he shouted that she was an ungrateful wife who had discarded her husband once she was bored. He twisted the truth, claiming that he had built the company only for Emily and her father to steal it from him through deceit. He played the victim perfectly, crying crocodile tears, hoping to win sympathy from donors and journalists. "Look at me," he screamed. "I'm her husband. Look what she's done to me. While she stands there like an angel, she lets me starve. Where is your conscience, Emily Carter? Is this the true face of the so-called righteous woman you admire?" Some guests unfamiliar with the truth began to hesitate.
Murmurs of doubt and misplaced sympathy spread. Jason smirked. He thought he had won. But the smile didn't last. Emily inhaled deeply and stepped back toward the podium. She didn't take Jason's microphone. Instead, she switched on the backup mic. Her face showed no fear, only a piercing, icy calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said steadily, "I apologize for this disruption. This man claims I abandoned him and treated him cruelly. He asks for proof of my conscience." She paused. "Very well, I will give you proof, but not the kind he expects." Her gaze hardened. "I believe it's time everyone knows the truth, why this trash had to be removed from my life." She gestured toward the multimedia operator. The giant screen behind the stage flickered. A CCTV video began to play. Clear image, crystal clear audio. It was footage from the day it all began. The room fell into dead silence. On screen, Jason appeared well-dressed and arrogant, throwing divorce papers straight into Emily's face. His cruel insults echoed through the ballroom's advanced sound system. The video continued, Jason stuffing Emily's clothes into black garbage bags and throwing them outside. Then came the phone call. "Come pick up this useless trash right now. I've divorced her." Jason's voice boomed through the speakers. The silence became suffocating. Hundreds of eyes watched the screen as Jason's brutality and arrogance were laid bare. They saw Emily standing there, silent and crying, treated worse than an animal. The video ended with Jason kneeling at Richard Wilson's feet after discovering that the wealth he coveted had never belonged to him. Jason, standing on the stage, froze. His face turned deathly pale. The audience's sympathy vanished, replaced by disgust, anger, and contempt. Shouts erupted. "Shameless man! Get him off the stage!" Emily stepped closer, slowly, purposefully. Her dominance was overwhelming. Jason stumbled backwards until he was cornered at the edge of the stage. Emily turned off her microphone and leaned in just enough for only him to hear. Her eyes were cold. "Thank you for divorcing me that day," she whispered. "It was the best and most beautiful thing you ever did for my life." Her eyes were cold. "Now enjoy your stage of humiliation. This is your final performance." She stepped back and signaled the head of security. This time, there was no mercy. 4 large security guards seized Jason and dragged him off the stage like a sack of trash as the crowd jeered. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing his terror and disgrace. Jason was hauled through the corridors and thrown out the back door of the hotel, right beside the kitchen's garbage disposal area. He collapsed among foul-smelling trash bags, exactly as he once wished for Emily. Inside, the event resumed. Emily received a standing ovation for her courage and composure. Outside, amid flies and stench, Jason sobbed uncontrollably, realizing his life was truly over. 1 year later. A year passed. Life's wheel turned mercilessly, placing everyone exactly where they deserved to be. That morning, the lobby of the towering skyscraper owned by the Carter-Wilson Corporation buzzed with activity. The building gleamed after a major renovation, now a symbol of success under Emily Carter's leadership. Yet near a marble pillar, a lone figure knelt on the floor. A thin man in a faded blue cleaning uniform scrubbed a coffee stain with a rag. It was Jason Carter. He looked far older than his years. Wrinkles carved his face, his hair thinning and streaked with gray. Nothing remained of the former executive director. After prison, for embezzlement and the hotel incident, Jason was unemployable. His criminal record shut every door. His wealth was gone. His family disowned him. His friends vanished. The only job he could get was outsourced janitorial work. The cruelest irony? He was assigned to clean this very building, the one he once ruled. Every day was psychological torture. He cleaned toilets he once used, mopped halls he once strode through arrogantly, and emptied trash cans